Are you looking for a career that will make a real difference? One that gives you the skills and training to help people improve their lives? A fulfilling career that lets you see the good you're doing every day, something to really feel good about. You'll find all that and more in social work, because being a social worker is a life-changing career, and the first life it will change is yours. Find out more at gov.ie/social work careers, an initiative of the Government of Ireland.
Acast recommends podcasts we love.
Have you ever wondered how the Irish Catholic Church got so powerful? Or did you know that Hitler's translator was actually an ex-priest from Cork? And while we're talking about Cork, why exactly was Michael Collins killed in 1922? These are all intriguing topics covered in recent episodes of the Irish History podcast. And if they sound like something that interests you, join me, Finn Dwyer, on the Irish History podcast to explore the fascinating past that defines our present.
Acast is home to the world's best podcasts, including the Blind Boy podcast, Ready to be Real with Sheila Shoiga, and the one you're listening to right now.
Salute, salve e benvenuti alla Storia d'Italia Extra. Oggi un'intervista in inglese, ma spero che vorrete dargli la possibilità. So bene che la barriera linguistica a volte può essere un problema, ma qui parliamo con un tedesco che parla in inglese e quindi parla in modo molto chiaro. Dunque, chi è il nostro tedesco? Ma è Maiorianus, all'anagrafe Sebastian. Sebastian è un grande appassionato di storia tardo-antica e quando ha aperto il suo canale YouTube, gli dei dell'algoritmo hanno mandato verso di me ovviamente il suo canale, che ho visto svilupparsi negli ultimi anni in modo sempre più approfondito. Ve lo consiglio se parlate inglese perché ci sono tutti gli argomenti che riguardano la tarda antichità e l'alto medioevo, insomma a volte può essere un buon integratore al podcast. Con Sebastian Maiorianus abbiamo pensato di fare una diretta per parlare appunto di tarda antichità in generale, ma su un argomento specifico, ovvero la transizione delle città romane verso il loro destino alto medievale e di come questo spesso non corrisponda all'immagine che tutti ci siamo fatti di città in rovina dove vivono al loro interno delle povere comunità derelitte. Come vedremo, la realtà dei fatti è abbastanza diversa e questo perfino in luoghi indubbiamente più impattati dalle invasioni barbariche come la Gallia, ad esempio. Ma come vedrete, la diretta con Maiorianus è andata su tante altre cose e spero che sia di vostro interesse. Tra l'altro l'abbiamo realizzata ai tempi anche per pubblicizzare, per spiegare, per far conoscere il fumetto Ammiano, che se non avete ancora avuto l'occasione di comprarlo, vi consiglio caldamente. Ammianus, come sapete, o Ammiano insomma, è disponibile in inglese, in italiano e in latino ed è la storia davvero della transizione di una villa romana verso un villaggio alto medievale. È una storia che conoscete nel podcast con la puntata 105, ma è resa in un modo che penso vi commuoverà perché potrete vedere quello che magari vi siete solo immaginati. E vi assicuro che dietro c'è tutto un lavoro enorme di ricerca sulle fonti e anche sull'archeologia per dare la giusta visibilità al periodo e al VI secolo, che non credo sia molto rappresentato in generale nei media, incluso ovviamente il fumetto. Ma detto questo, vi lascio alla puntata con Maiorianus, che poi non è altro che una nuova speranza, no? Salute salve, we are live, of course, live in English. I am so glad and so happy to have here Sebastian from Germany, from Munich in Germany, Maiorianus on YouTube. You must know that Seb started his channel in 2021, and back then for once the algorithm did something right and sent me the algorithm from YouTube sent me his video. I think, Seb, you had maybe 2 videos or something like that, and I said, okay, with that name and that topic, I must subscribe. So there you go. I've been watching here off and on your videos since the beginning, so I'm very, very happy to have you here, Seb. Thank you for coming to our little group in Storia d'Italia.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you for inviting me to your podcast. I feel very honored, and I'm very happy to be here. And thank you for watching the videos, of course. I feel very honored to have you since such a long time as a viewer. For once, the YouTube algorithm did something right. It doesn't happen very often, but
no.
I'm happy to hear that it sometimes still works, and that people get the right suggestions. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, it's strange that the gods of Google still know something about us. We were looking for an excuse to talk to each other, and one of the videos I like the most from Maiorianus, go look at subscribe to his channel on YouTube, was about basically the changing of Roman cities through what we'll call late antiquity and the high Middle Ages. So your question was basically, what would you see in 700 AD if you walked around cities? But before we go there, so that's gonna be the main topic. I would like to ask you just a quick question. So why late antiquity? And how did you have the idea of starting the channel, and why you called it that way?
I mean, I have to confess, Maiorianus is not my first YouTube channel. So I had a previous YouTube channel. So I'm not like, this is not my first YouTube experiment with Maiorianus. And I had a previous channel, but it was more like with technology and space flight, because from what I did before, I studied physics. So from my profession,
okay.
I'm actually more like a technological person. I'm interested in like technology. And so I did a first YouTube channel, but I have also this interest in the Roman Empire and everything that has to do with Romans. And I cannot tell you exactly why. It's a bit strange. I think it has to do with the fact that my grandfather already told me a lot of stories when I was a kid, because I was born in Romania. Okay, so in like the old province of Dacia, right?
Yes.
And my grandfather, he was a complete fan of Roman history. And he told me many stories about the fights between the Dacians and the Romans. And I think this might have had an influence. So I had an interest in Roman history since I was a kid. And then it got much more strong about 24 years ago, when I then started reading more about Roman history, because I was really fascinated when I found out that the Roman Empire lasted much longer than I knew about, because in school we only learned about Caesar, about Augustus, right? The famous Romans. And then I found out like, hey, there were like, I think even it's a bit embarrassing, but I think it was through the movie Gladiator. I'm sorry that I have to confess this. Okay.
It's okay. It's actually okay. And that's actually a good question then about, because I saw you made a video about Gladiator too. So, why wouldn't a movie not awake an interest in something, right? It's a perfect.
Yeah. And I mean, I wanted to know after I saw the movie, like how much of that is actually real, how much of that happened really, right? And then I was first quite impressed, like when I started reading, I was like, wow, the Roman Empire was still very strong and did impressive things 200 years after Augustus and Caesar. I was like, wow, this is incredible. Like those time spans, 200 years. And then I found out but it lasted much longer.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to know more. And then I started reading how long did it last? And why did it fall in the West then? Why did the Western Roman Empire fall? And what happened? And how could it come to that? And then I was drawn into this rabbit hole, this rabbit hole of late antiquity and late Roman history where you want to know, why did it fall? I wanted to know. And then I found out, oh God, this is insanely complicated. This is you cannot say one reason. You
Impossibly
have to
complicated, right? It's something you cannot wrap your head around. The worst questions that they can make you when you're doing a presentation is, so why did the empire fall? And I don't have a week here to explain it. so you inside yourself, you like to scream, I don't know. There's so many reasons, but no, we do now kind of, but I feel every time for me also it changes a bit, the details, and then you start thinking, but did it fall? Did it fall when I think it fell? So I completely understand your feeling. And by the way, for me it was similar. I mean, I was always in love with Rome. Sometimes even when it was not popular. So now it's fairly popular, but there was a time when in Italy especially it was not popular. And then I found this book on the bookshelf, Peter Hatter, The Fall of the Roman Empire, A New History. And that title, A New History and the Fall of the Roman Empire, says there's something new to say about it. Of course, naive me back then. So I picked it up and said, oh, this is incredible. It's insane. I don't know any of these emperors, and I should. It's such a fascinating history. So that's where also my love story with late antiquity was born, just in case someone is curious about it. So very interesting. So why Maiorianus then for the title?
Yeah, I'm similar to you then, because I was, as I said, drawn into this rabbit hole, and then I found out wow, there are so many emperors nobody talks about. Why is that, Why is everybody talking about Augustus? Why everybody knows Caesar? But nobody was talking about Majorian. Nobody was talking about Anthemius. Nobody was talking about Flavius Stilicho. Nobody was talking about, those amazing generals as well, not only the emperors, but those great defenders of Rome.
Aetius, right?
Yes, exactly. And I was thinking, this is so unfair. They were heroes. I was impressed by what they achieved and the battles they fought and what epic stories were taking place in that time. I couldn't believe it, and then I was really very much fascinated with that period, and I was actually really sad that the Roman Empire fell. Sometimes when I read these stories about the Emperor Majorian, how he failed in the end, I was legitimately sad. It was a real sadness. No, this cannot be true. And I was thinking then, because I said before I had a YouTube channel before that. I was realizing there was no channel that only talks about late Roman history,
right, yes,
or late antiquity and those underrated Roman emperors that many keep forgetting, an unfairness towards their characters. And I wanted to, make a channel that only talks about those unknown Roman emperors and unknown events that happened, because I thought, it's only fair to them. It's only fair to talk about them more, because they deserve to be remembered as much as Caesar or Augustus. They deserve to be remembered as much, in my opinion. And that was the idea that I had for Maiorianus, and that's how it started.
Yeah, that's I completely agree about that, and I understand. I had the same feeling. I started my podcast from Constantine, and I always go forward. So And I was saying, okay, I give from granted you have heard about all the others before. I'm gonna talk to you about the ones that you do not know. That was my my idea also for the podcast. So you guys that you are listening or watching, and or watching afterwards, just know that we have very much this in common. But let's get to the point. So we want to talk about the evolution of cities, because one of the things that we have in mind, invariably when we study the fall of the Roman Empire, what we imagine happened is that there is a barbaric invasion, cities are burned to the ground or half burned to the ground, many are abandoned, some are not, but they are just shells, empty shells, people living in the ruins of these great cities. And there are cases like this. I think the closest that it gets to this is Britannia, where really you have a big fall in urban life. But one of the things that I noticed from your video that was talking about life in 700 AD is how much modern scholarship and even archaeology in general has revealed to us about what really happened between 400 and 700 AD. So I would like to say, let's start talking about this. This is a big topic, but let's start talking about it.
Absolutely. I love this topic. And one of my major interests is actually urban history, because I think this is also so much neglected. Because everybody likes to talk about great battles, right? About epic battles and the characters themselves. What did these emperors do about their laws? But what is often neglected are the cities, like themselves, where people lived, like where most of the people lived actually, because the Roman Empire was a highly urbanized society, as we know. And so I was quite amazed to see that this aspect is very, very neglected. There wasn't any video on YouTube, as far as I know, where you could that talked about the transition, for example, of the city of Rome from its peak, let's say in 320 AD, right, when all the magnificent buildings were built, when Maxentius had just finished or almost finished many of his grandiose buildings, and then Constantine finished them, of course, after the Battle of the Milvian Bridge.
Last paint, and then okay, now it's mine.
Exactly, and then of course it was him who did it officially.
Exactly,
and the contributions of Maxentius were he didn't.
He didn't do anything. But yes, so sorry, I interrupted you. But basically, we have this Rome at the peak of its power, which, by the way, most people think the peak, that beautiful models are at the time of Trajan, maybe. But there's so many other buildings that are built. I mean, not as many, but there are several big buildings are built after that. But let's say, as you rightly said, by the time of Constantine and Maxentius, that is the peak of Rome. And then
exactly.
And then what happens?
Exactly, and so it's interesting because the peak of Rome, as you said, was really quite late in 300, the urban peak, when we say it had the largest extent of buildings, the most impressive buildings, so all the secular buildings were finished. It was really Rome was in its most grandiose state, basically, as an urban fabric. And so I was amazed that there was no video on YouTube which told how did Rome transform from this magnificent and beautiful city in 320 AD to a field of ruins 1,000 years later, right? How did that process exactly look? Because it must have been a gradual process and probably also a very complicated process. And so, I started reading a lot of books on that, and many people think, many people come into Roman history and they think, fall of Rome, then they read 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire fell. So as you said before, Marco, they imagine, of course, the barbarians come in, the cities are burned, everything gets destroyed, and then a few years later, it's only a field of ruins, right? Mm-hmm. That's how everybody thinks it happened, or most people, if you would ask anyone on the street. But the reality is insanely more complicated, because when I started reading about it, I found out wait, this is this is incredible. Actually, the urban fabric was in a pretty good state even after the so-called fall of Rome, you know? And this was very surprising to me, like, huh? But I thought there was this cataclysmic event in 476 AD when the Roman Empire fell, and, you know, very bad event. And then I find out, like, but wait, actually in Rome nothing changed. Like, for instance, if we take Rome as an example, if you would have been in the city of Rome in, say, the year 475 AD, it would have looked pretty much the same as in 500 AD, 25 years later. So
indeed.
I was kind of surprised when I found this out. And so it is a very complicated process how actually the cities transitioned. And that's why I still keep making so many videos about this topic, because it is very, very hard to grasp for many people, even for myself. I sometimes forget the things myself because it's really complicated how actually this process took place, right?
Yeah, and it's very progressive. I just want to say a hi to Marco Cecchini because he's we seem to have called him when we talked about Maxentius. So I just say hi. And also to Martin because he's one of your compatriots. He is from Bavaria, so I thought that was cool. And I say hi to all the others that are already watching us. So you're saying the process is a slow process. I will say Rome is probably one of the most actually where it's closer, even if it's very far from the idea that we have in mind. The drop is significant though. So you know in 500 no, but in 550 it would have been not the great city that it was already, although not completely destroyed. I mean, the forum was still used. In the last monument built in the forum is the column of Phocas, and that was built in the early 7th century. And if you go today there and you look at this column, which, by the way, fun fact, is the only column in the forum which has always been standing straight, because all the other columns have been raised over time. The only one that is in exactly the place where it was put was is actually the column of Phocas. And that was built at the time of Gregory the Great in the early 7th century. So, and but it looks exactly like the other monuments that you expect from 1st century AD. So it doesn't look any different. Also because they reused it a bit. So, but yes, there is a big change in Rome. But the Roman Empire was made of hundreds and hundreds of cities. And you were talking specifically, I was very interested about for example, about cities in Francia, so in Gaul. And I think you made the case of Köln, so Colonia, if I remember correctly. Can you tell us about that?
It's actually quite fascinating because I was also surprised when I found out that there were archaeological excavations, I think in the 90s in Cologne. And they found actually that the Roman city, that the Roman city lasted a lot longer than we would have thought. That the Vikings, I think there were Viking raids at some point, I cannot tell you the exact years, but it was in the 9th century. So in the 9th century, it was found that something completely new was built over the pre-existing stuff.
So something was completely destroyed, but up until the 9th century, so the 800s AD, so we are already in Carolingian time, basically.
Yes. And because for me it was really surprising because if I think about the year 800 AD, I think about Middle Ages already. I think that the architecture, everything looks already very, very medieval. The art style, the architectural style, I think about this typical medieval style, but I wouldn't think about a city that still looks pretty Roman. And so what they found is actually that the urban fabric and thus the building structure themselves was still pretty much from the Roman era until the Vikings destroyed Cologne. And for me, that was
Rome on the Rhine. Rome on the Rhine.
Rome on the Rhine, exactly. Almost the same as Rome, yes. And so for me, that was really surprising. And this is actually a theme that you find in many other cities as well in Europe. So the cities in Gallia, the cities in former Hispania, they all share a bit of a similar theme in that regard. In that, for instance, let's say you are in not long after the kingdom of Soissons, the realm of Syagrius had been conquered by the Franks, right?
So we talking for people, we're talking about the 480s.
Exactly. So 486, I think, was when the kingdom of Syagrius was conquered by the Franks. And many picture this like, okay, wow, now the Franks conquered it and the cities are completely transformed in a very short time. But in reality, the cities of the early Frankish kingdom, the Merovingian time, they were essentially Roman cities.
Yeah.
They were essentially the fabric of the cities. The buildings were one-to-one still from the Roman time. And there were sometimes still like celebrations held using the old amphitheaters.
Yeah,
and
like in Paris, right? In Paris,
yes.
They were doing that for a long time. The baths were open. The Cluny baths in Paris, I know that. In Pavia, in Italy, the bath we know from textual proofs, but also archaeological no. But from textual proofs, we know that there were baths in the palace and baths for the public, which were open during the Langobard, the equivalent of the Merovingian, I will say, during the Lombard time, the Langobards. So again, we have cases where the fabric of this, and you can tell in reality, because otherwise the streets would have changed. No, but so many streets of Roman time are still with us today. So clearly people kept living exactly in the same places. But what you are saying is even more. They weren't just living in the same streets. They were actually using the same buildings, or buildings that looked exactly the same from the Roman time. So built with, not in wood, with thatched roof, but again we still have walls like in Roman times, right? That's kind of the what you're alluding to.
Yes. In the cities, certainly, absolutely. So they, for instance, if we just come back to Rome again for a second, in Rome they actually just many times lived in the old insula apartment buildings. So what happened is that, of course, these insular buildings, at some point, they weren't maintained properly anymore. There was not the manpower anymore. There weren't the funds anymore to maintain all the old Roman buildings. And so what happened is that the highest floors, they became uninhabitable because, you had rain and you had weather patterns and climate that, kind of like destroyed the old roofs. The roof tiles fell down at some point. And so what did they do? They just inhabited the lower floors because the lower floors were still inhabitable, And, they sometimes also took over the old domus or villas of the ancient Roman landlords or aristocrats. And then they just modified them a bit to accommodate more people. And so, they took those structures from Roman times. They took those things that existed and maybe modified them a bit here and there with what they had as like stones or tools available at the time. But in essence, in the cities, if you would have gone to a city in Western Europe where the Roman Empire had built cities, in 500 or 600 or even 700 AD, or as we said now before in Cologne, even 800 AD, you would still have seen a lot of the old Roman structures used. And I find it kind of fascinating and interesting that this process took longer than we would have maybe, intuitively thought, right? You probably as well were surprised because I was very surprised that it took such a long time. I would have thought like in 600, 700 AD, all the Roman stuff was already complete ruins and that they had built completely new structures. So that is how I was thinking about this, yes.
I was thinking about that. I knew in Italy things were different. So because the towns in Italy endured more than north of the Alps more often, and the fabric of the city clearly looks, the plan of the city of many Italian cities is very similar to the Roman one. And so I knew that in Italy cities had endured, they had changed, of course. We know that in all Italian cities there were changes, and we may go talk about that. But what I didn't know is my biggest surprise is a city like Cologne, like Colonia for Italians, that is really at the border of the Western Roman Empire. So we're talking about really like a city built to housing legions on the border. And even there, things are very similar to Roman times. So that for me was even more surprising. In Italian cities, there are some changes. One important one is that often the forum tends to migrate. So the city center tends to migrate. And I've seen this pattern several times. Basically, what happened in many cases was that the cathedral, when it was built, the Christian cathedral was built in the periphery, in the suburbs of the city, because the center was built over. So they didn't destroy the ancient temples, they just built a cathedral, next to the walls. Which, by the way, is the case also in Rome, because they built St. John in Lateran, that was the first cathedral of Rome, is still the cathedral of Rome, is right next to the walls of Rome. So that happened, but then what happens is that the economy tends to migrate in the surrounding of the cathedral as it became more important. So often the old city center is abandoned. So in the past, archaeologists would go and would look at the forum and say, oh, by year 400, this area is really neglected and it's really looking a bit poor, things are falling apart. So they assume, because this is the center of the city, the rest of the city is also like that. But now what we know now is that instead other parts of the city were just doing fine. It's just that the forum with its pagan temples, they were often not converted to churches. This also was a big surprise for me, because I was expecting a very early... Instead, usually they weren't converted to churches very fast. So they tended to be abandoned and to be a more neglected part of the city. And the center will migrate somewhere else. But the city remained vital. So now we know that the city is vital just somewhere else, basically.
Yes, absolutely. I find this transition fascinating because I was often trying to understand what actually caused this shift in the cities, and it was like, was it like a single factor, or how can we imagine this? That is my obsession also a bit. Why I'm trying. I do all these videos many times talking about quite similar times, 500 to 700 AD in that time, or 400 to 700 AD, or even 800 AD. And that is what I was trying to find out, and how we can picture this. And, it's such a complicated topic to imagine this, because, okay, what happened to the population, first of all? Why did it shrink in many instances, right? And then you start learning about the wars, about the Gothic wars. You start learning about the plague of Justinian. You start learning about, all the catastrophes that happened and that had a huge impact on the population. But then, of course, you start also learning about the massive impact, for instance, of earthquakes, right? Because if you would ask someone, what was the greatest destroyer of the fabric of Roman cities. You would say like, oh, the barbarians, right? Naively, many people would say, oh, of course, the barbarians, they tore down everything. The Vandals in 455, when they sacked Rome, they destroyed all the temples. And or the Christians tore down the pagan temples, which is also sometimes propagated, But in reality, it was earthquakes, I just find it fascinating to think like most of the times, the people would just, as you said, they just leave the stuff there and just migrate somewhere else. They might reuse some of the building material when the temple collapsed, right? When a temple was old and then it collapsed on its own weight or because of an earthquake. And then they just took the material and built it up in their new quarter. Or they beautified sometimes the new quarters with statues from which they found, or columns which they found from other structures that were destroyed. So that was a very inventive reuse of material. But it's funny because the greatest destroyer actually of the old Roman structures, I think, was just time, earthquakes, floods, natural,
natural
weather,
causes,
rain. Natural forces.
I read of several, for example, tsunamis especially in the eastern Mediterranean, where the earthquakes tend to be even stronger, and big tsunamis that actually changed the landscape and changed all coastal cities. And by the way, about the reuse, I remember that there were strict laws, but then I don't know how well implemented, because laws, they can always be implemented in several different ways. But there were laws on exactly what you're talking about. You couldn't go and take, a column from a public building that fell. You needed to be authorized by someone to do so. And there were laws on how to do that in late antiquity and even in the early Middle Ages. And there was this sense that this is a public building, so it belongs to everyone, so not everyone can pick it up. But we can reuse the material if it fell. Why not? What we're gonna leave it a pile of rubble there just because. And let's be clear, every building sooner or later falls. It's yes, with proper maintenance they endure more. And probably the maintenance was a bit lacking at this time, but every building sooner or later will fall for a reason or another, especially if built with the techniques of the ancients. So I noticed that you are really fascinated by the Gothic wars, as I am as well. I mean, I'm Italian, so obviously I'm interested, but I would say, let me take away that obviously, because so few people in Italy know what a huge deal for Italian history the Gothic Wars are. If I went and I asked around and says, tell me, really important period of Italian history, I doubt anyone. They would say 476, very likely, which for Italy was basically meaningless. But they wouldn't say that period. So how did you come to, let's say, how did you approach this time period, and what interested you in it? Because I saw that you made videos about it.
Oh yeah, I made quite a few, too many videos probably about it, and we'll still make more because there's so much to say about this fascinating time. So I think my interest came from when I learned that, I wanted to find like how exactly, what event was the most destructive for, in late antiquity, or like how could we imagine the fall of Rome? And naively, I thought, as I said before, like in 476, there was this big fall of Rome. And then as I read more, I found out like, no, in 476, it was a very inconsequential event. One boy emperor was abdicated by a Germanic general called Odoacer. And this is actually old news. Not much changed for everyday people. So nothing changed in Rome. Nothing. in Ravenna, okay, there was a new ruler now, but all the institutions, all the, the people, the lifestyle, the schools
laws,
of rhetorics,
the schools, the laws, the
Yes.
roads, everything is exactly the same.
everything stayed the same. Everything stayed the same. And I was like, but if everything stayed the same in 476, then what caused, what happened that caused destruction? Because apparently something bad must have happened afterwards, right? And so the more I kept reading about late antiquity, I found out about this fascinating period of the Gothic kingdom. And actually, I was quite amazed that when I read that, actually, that was almost like a golden era after the disasters of the 5th century. 3 sacks of Rome in 410, 455, 472 by Ricimer even. Huge disasters and in massive invasions in the 5th century, multiple times into Italy. Then suddenly I was amazed, like, this was what? This was a golden era after the fall of Rome, where suddenly things looked actually counterintuitively better than before the fall of Rome. That is very counterintuitive, and nobody knew that. And I was like, what's happening
Seb,
here? This is strange.
I have to tell you something about this. So I discovered, studying, Italian archaeological studies, that in the past, when they will find something beautiful around this time, they will say, it was probably built in 440, 450, before, the fall of the Roman Empire. Then new archaeologists come 50 years later, and they study it and say, it was really built in the 6th century, this thing. And it's insane how much stuff, comparatively speaking, was built in the short time of the Gothic kingdom, including the stuff that we consider Byzantine, like San Vitale. You go to Ravenna, most of those churches were actually built under the Goths, so they were not built by the Byzantine emperors. But we call the Byzantine style, because the style is that one. But they were built during the Gothic time. So it's incredible. And then you read the sources, say, okay, maybe it's just archaeology, but then you read the sources, and the people of the time, they're saying, we live in great time, everything is going well, we're restoring buildings, and our king is building new roads, and then they found this stone near Rome. They were saying, Theodoric, Semper Augustus, always August. Theodoric, like, they're so happy that you'll read the inscriptions and the sources of the time and say, oh, things are doing great, just great. And then you think, so what happened then? And that's, sorry. And then I will bring you back to, but I wanted to do this little interruption.
And that's when, unfortunately, it ended abruptly, right? With the Gothic Wars. And of course, I mean, if you keep reading what's happening, it's like a fascinating storybook. I was like, wow, this really happened. This is too insane to be true. And then with the Eastern Roman Empire, we lost the Western provinces. We have to restore the glory of Rome. We have to reconquer the lost Western provinces, right? It sounds, you think at first, okay, this sounds like understandable from their perspective. So, and then I started reading about Justinian and about Flavius Belisarius, the incredible general who was a tactical and military genius, and he was able to reconquer the Vandal kingdom, and in 1 year with only 15,000 men. And I was like, what? He basically destroyed this in 1 year with 15,000 men. And then, of course, later, Justinian didn't know when to stop, right? And then, he needed the pretext to attack the Ostrogothic kingdom, because it was basically his plan to restore the Western Roman Empire, right? And so, of course, when Amalasuntha was killed, it was the perfect pretext to start the invasion of the Gothic kingdom. And then it's when disaster struck, because the Gothic wars, it wasn't a quick war like the Vandals. it wasn't like, oh yeah, let's in 1 year it's over and we will finish it very fast. But unfortunately dragged for 20 years.
Forever.
It was insane. It was like, oh God, it was a huge disaster and it was a never-ending war. And then the plague hit at the same time, and there was also this crazy event of 536 when the sun darkened, and then was famine, huge famine. It must have felt like the apocalypse, really.
Yeah,
it must have felt like the end times.
And then the plague, you have really all the horses of the apocalypse. It's really, when I was telling it, I realized it's hard to explain, even to how much of a tragedy that must have. We are talking about people that were not used for more than generations to have problems of that size or even close to that size. And then all suddenly you have this thing where you have a war that is so destructive because it's like a war that is city by city, siege, destroy the city, move to the next city, destroy that too. So it's not like a battles, all wars are destructive in a way. When armies march through a land, in the movies they show just the army marching, but usually what happens is that a lot of people lose their life or they lose their possessions, right? But the worse than that is when those armies are actually stuck and they're making siege and counter siege, and then they're really destroying everything. That's true. And then on top of that you have the sun darkens, famine, the plague. So I would say all that, and here let me do a little promotion, but all that I wanted to, in a way, to explain it in a way that was understandable for people. So, I told this story through several episodes. I told the entire story of the war. But when I finished, I said, okay, I need something that really gets the idea of what must have felt like to live through this. And that's when I decided to make what today is the only episode of my podcast, which is basically a sort of a novel, a radio drama.
Acast recommends podcasts we love.
Have you ever wondered how the Irish Catholic Church got so powerful? Or did you know that Hitler's translator was actually an ex-priest from Cork? And while we're talking about Cork, why exactly was Michael Collins killed in 1922? These are all intriguing topics covered in recent episodes of the Irish History podcast. And if they sound like something that interests you, join me, Finn Dwyer, on the Irish History podcast to explore the fascinating past that defines our present.
Acast is home to the world's best podcasts, including the Blind Boy podcast, Ready to be Real with Sheila Shoiga, and the one you're listening to right now.
So it's invented, but it's set in a villa in the Gothic times, and the villa becomes a village. So this is also a little touch, because we have this transition between the Roman villa that becomes then a Langobardic village, which, by the way, is in archaeology. There's several cases where that exactly this process played out exactly like this. And then I remember that there was these little things that they were found in a villa with a wedding ring that was clearly between, marriage between a Roman and a Gothic woman. So we had this story, which became then a podcast, which is now becoming a comic book. So if you don't know it yet and you're listening to this, we have a Maiorianus. I will send a link somewhere. But we have the Kickstarter going on. I may show later a few images from the comic book, but it's exactly about this topic here. So going from the time of plenty to the Longobards' time. So which happened very quickly, right, Seb? Just one lifetime, basically, which is mind-blowing.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I have to thank you very much for doing that amazing graphic novel. This is, I will I will read this 5 times probably. I will look at it many times because this is such a fascinating time for me as well. And so I'm really happy that you have decided to pick that time and do a comic about it. It's wonderful. And I cannot wait to see what you have produced.
Thank you. I can't wait to have it. We finished the last scene yesterday, so we are ready to wrap it up now, as soon as the Kickstarter ends in 11th of October, and then we will be able to print and ship it. But thank you for the interest, let's say. I need to get it. Well, but meanwhile, yes. So, what did you? So, this is a crazy time. What is in your opinion? What the people at the time felt about this time?
As you said before, I think the kingdom of Theodoric, it was seen as a restoration. Funny enough, a restoration of the Roman Empire. The Roman people. It's so funny because it's like, fall of Rome, 476. No, the people in 510, for instance, they really thought like they even treated Theodoric as the emperor. They even called him emperor. So the everyday Roman, the regular Roman, was actually thinking, we are living in times where the Roman Empire is being reborn, restored. Yeah. Because there were really bad times in the 5th century, the 3 sacks of Rome, the many battles in Italy, the many invasions of Italy. It was a really bad time. And now everything is being restored, and the Roman Empire is being reborn in sort of a bit of a modified form as like some sort of Romano-Gothic empire, right? Kind of like a hybrid empire.
I like how you made it, Romano-Gothic empire. It's really cool.
Thank you. It's so fascinating, and I think this would have happened, if we can just speculate for a while, if the Eastern Roman Empire wouldn't have attacked the Ostrogothic kingdom in 536, I think it was, when the war started. Actually this kingdom, it looked pretty good to create some sort of new national identity, some sort of Romano-Gothic. It sounds strange, but that's what I would call it, identity. Yeah. And the Romans really thought very positively of that time, and they thought like, oh wow, it's wonderful. The Roman Empire is being restored by Theodoric. Look, the buildings are being repaired. In Rome, you had buildings being repaired in that time. You had like I think the Vigiles. I think Theodoric, not even only, I think he used the revenue from the wine tax to repair the palace on the Palatine Hill, the palace of the Caesars. Yeah. And also the Vigiles were tasked with protecting the buildings in that time. It's incredible. And also many of the old aqueducts were repaired, and many of the old buildings were repaired by Theodoric. So it's I think the Romans really thought that something wonderful is happening, and that finally the bad times are over of the last century. And like, finally the bad times are over, and then the tragedy, of course, that the times get even worse. It's
much worse than before. It's funny. To summarize it, I say the Roman Empire in the West was destroyed by the Roman Empire because it was destroyed by the Eastern Roman Empire. Yeah. But in a way, that wasn't the goal, obviously. So they didn't. It's not like Justinian went, let's destroy it. No, that wasn't the goal. However, that was what came out of it. I have a few comments. This is in Italian, but I will translate from Marco.
Marco. I like Marco very much. Hi, Marco. How's it going?
Yeah. We are all friends of late antiquity here. So Marco is, of course, Maxentius. A proposito di riuso, so talking about reusing, some ancient Etruscan towns abandoned in Republican times, for example, Blera, but I will add also Orvieto, a very beautiful city in Umbria, in the 6th and 7th century were revitalized by Lombards and Byzantines in their new borders. I will expand to that. I don't know if you studied this, but this is a very peculiar thing about Italy. So let me explain this thing, because it's a very Italian thing. I don't know if you encountered it. So basically, in pre-Roman times, most of the city centers were usually up on a hill, as you will do, right? Italy is a very hilly country. Up on a hill, it's easier to defend. When Rome unified Italy, often those towns, and it was a way for the Romans to control them too, no? They were moving them to the lowlands to build these straight cities. So, for example, Volsini, which was an ancient Etruscan town, became what today is Bolsena. It was a city on the flat, there was an old city on a hill, became a city in the flat and on a plain, and stayed there until late antiquity. Then in late antiquity, it went back to the hill, and that's why it's called Orvieto. Orvieto comes from urbs vetus. So the people that lived there, they were calling that is the old town. We live now in the new town, but that's the old. And now the new town, the so-called new town, is abandoned. There's nothing there. It's an archaeological ruin. But the city today is again on the hill, because that's where it moved during late antiquity. In the case that Marco is talking about, this is even when Italy was divided into front lines, and then you need all these strong points. So these ancient towns from Samnite's time, from the Etruscan times, they are reused as strong points, which again, very fascinating evolution. I don't know if you knew about this. That's why I spent so much time.
That's interesting. I didn't know about it. No, that is actually a new information for me as well. It's
could be a topic. Wow. Could be a topic for a video. That's a new for a future video. But yes, it's a very Italian.
Write it down after our podcast here. I will write it down immediately.
Yeah, because it's I think it's typical of especially central Italy, where you have this movement from the ancient town back down to the plain, back to the ancient towns. Then we have another question. I will let you answer this. Saluti, hi to both of you from Andreas. Something that made me curious is the case of Milan, that lost practically the entire urban fabric of the Roman time, even though it was the capital in the 4th century. I don't know, this is maybe too specific, but do you know more about this?
I mean, what comes to my mind now, of course, was, I think, in the Gothic Wars, but I'm not sure how devastating that was, because I think in the Gothic Wars, I think it was 539 or 540.
Yeah. There's a siege. There's a very destructive siege from the Goths.
Destructive and brutal siege. Yes, the Burgundians, I think they just completely killed almost everyone inside, and there was a lot of destruction and then burning. Probably like a huge fire raged, and I don't know if many people survived this. And after that, I think very few people survived in Milan. It was a very much reduced city for a very long time. Indeed, and I think it lost a lot of importance, and that's why
Pavia became important. Pavia and the nearby Pavia became the capital. So for a long time, I think it started picking up only in Carolingian times. It started recovering, so became more central. But yes, from the time of the Gothic Wars all the way to the Carolingian times, so for several centuries, it was not
again the Gothic
in a good
Wars,
shape. Gothic Wars is usually the answer for
Yes.
Italy, at least. It's really
Great.
for me. It's so fascinating that so few people know about this. It's our 30 years war, right? For Germany, it will be the 30 years war, right? But it's really our 30 years war, and it's not very prominent in the let's say in the discussions or in general. So that's very fascinating.
Yeah.
And what do you think about so one of your videos was also about the Langobards. So because also in my comic book, our comic book ends with the arrival of the Langobards, and it was about it's the why after this incredibly difficult war was won, then all suddenly we have the Langobards and they come and they conquer rather quickly. And you had a very good point about the Goths there, which I made too. But I want you to I would like you to explain a bit about that.
I think it was a multitude of reasons. So, first of all, the country, Italy, was depopulated.
Yeah.
There were so many abandoned cities after the Gothic Wars and after the plague that basically you had many cities completely depopulated. Yeah. Then there was also the problem, like the Eastern Roman Empire. Also, so many people died in the military, of the Eastern Roman Empire, that basically they didn't have the manpower anymore to really station a lot of troops to defend Italy. So it was like, okay, we have now won Italy. I think Narses, the Eastern Roman general, I think he was occupied even in the 560s. He was still had to defeat some rebellions that were springing up in the north of Italy.
Yeah, in Italy, northeast, northeast and north. Yes. But really just a few years before the invasion of the Lombards.
Exactly. So it wasn't really won, because you think like, oh, they won, and then how could this happen? But no, there were rebellions even into the 560s, which the remaining Ostrogoths, they didn't give up. Of course, you had they were seeking every chance to reconquer or reclaim their land, which they saw as their land. So of course they didn't give up. And then, of course, you had also other tribes, like I think you had incursions of the Burgundians, as we said before, of the Franks. I think the Franks even sometimes went into Italy in those days. So it was really difficult to hold this. And then, of course, the problem of the Eastern Roman Empire, not enough manpower. That was the big problem. They didn't have enough manpower. And the Lombards were smart, They knew about this, because it's every time I find it all the time interesting. The Germanic people, they had very good intelligence.
Yes,
they gathered,
indeed.
They had spies, they had a network of people, Every time it seems they knew that when something happened, okay, now we attack.
Okay, now we attack. They know immediately.
Yes.
Radio Frontier. Yes. I call it Radio Frontier. So it's like, okay.
Yes. They were so intelligent. It's incredible.
It's true.
And
I agree.
Yeah. So the Byzantines, the Eastern Romans, they have problems. We heard that they have some problems. They haven't stationed enough troops, and there aren't so many people anyways. And this land is ripe for the taking. It's ripe to be ours. And I think Alboin, the king of the Lombards in those times? He was dreaming of his own realm, because he heard stories. The Visigoths have their own kingdom. The Suevi have their own kingdom. The Franks have their own kingdom. We also want our own kingdom, And then he had the idea, okay, in Italy, apparently it is ravaged by war, It is many cities are abandoned, and the Eastern Romans, they don't have enough manpower to even inhabit all these cities and to defend them. So, let's just try to go there and see what happens. And of course, then the Ostrogoths, the remaining Ostrogoths, I think, were very happy to see other Germanic nations come and say like, hey, let's make a deal. We help you to, to defeat the Eastern Romans because we don't like them. They destroyed our kingdom. They destroyed our beautiful kingdom. So of course they were very willing to help the Lombards in their undertaking to conquer Italy.
And this is often not mentioned. There isn't an enormous amount of proof about this, but I think you make a very good point, because they could not have disappeared overnight. We know that just a few years before they were rebelling against the Narses, so they were still there. And also, I find it very fascinating that right before invading Italy, all suddenly the Lombard king says, we are Arians now. And I think this is propaganda, because the Goths were Arians. It was a way of saying, here we come. We're not only Germans, we Germanic. We are Arians, like you are, against these Nicaeans. Let's call them like this, because if I say Catholic, anyway. There are signs that and they invade and conquer quickly the part where the Ostrogoths were more numerous. So again, some cities deliver themselves without any problem. Pavia doesn't, but Pavia again is the ancient capital of the Ostrogoths during the war, and I think it's no coincidence that the Lombards then established themselves there, and in Verona again, which was also another capital of Theodoric. So there is clearly there some overlapping, which has I think been overlooked. I will say there's overlapping there. I agree.
It's really fascinating, and your theory I think makes sense with the Arianism. Like, let's unite our Germanic brothers, even in our faith, against, as you said, the Nicaeans, so that we have like a common, enemy, or like we feel more connected as well. So I personally think that theory makes a lot of sense.
But okay, we agree about this. So I wanted to show very quickly, just so that people know a little bit about what we are doing for this. So because we are trying to show this late antiquity period with the comic that is not very often shown. So we're trying to also look at the clothes, you see, like even this chariot. I looked, how were the Roman chariots in that time. It's not easy to find information about all these details, let's say. I noticed, but yeah, we're trying to, and this is the villa that will then become a village. So I just wanted to show you, because I promised I would. So that's kind
looks
of
very beautiful.
And this is our kids again playing a game which is documented. Our pastum, Sidonius Apollinaris, talks about it. So I thought, okay, we can put a game, a ball game which looks a bit like rugby in it. Makes sense. There we have almost contemporary sources talking about it. So makes sense to put it. There you go. Anyways, I don't want to take too much time, but I wanted to show don't tell, they say. So the I have. So do you think it was possible then we're talking about the Theodoric? Do you think it's possible in another future, another timeline, sliding doors, that the kingdom of Theodoric remains the most important in the West? Or the Franks were always destined to become the most important power in Western Europe?
It's really interesting. I was asking myself a similar question. So what would have needed to happen that the Eastern Roman Empire should not have attacked the Ostrogothic kingdom, right? And I think, Justinian always had this desire, kind of like this I mean, we don't know Justinian's like true motives, but if we think about like his ambitions and what he did in his life, about the magnificent buildings and his restorations and his laws, he was, I think, a character who wanted. He had this grand idea of still the Roman Empire, and he was a native Latin speaker, so he felt still this connection to the old Roman Empire, I think. And so I'm not sure if there would have been a timeline in which Justinian would not have attacked the Ostrogothic kingdom. If Amalasuntha would have lived longer, maybe he would have found another excuse.
Yeah, indeed. He was trying, and anything, somebody sneeze the wrong way, an excuse to invade.
Yes, exactly. And so I think what would have needed to happen, like either Justinian is in this alternate timeline a completely different person. For whatever reason, he grew up differently.
Or he dies at Nika. Which is not impossible. Which is not. That's that. We have to make that as the alternative story. Theodora doesn't convince him to stay. Belisarius doesn't kill 30,000 people in the hippodrome, and Justinian flees. And then they make whatever. I don't remember the guy. They made him emperor, and of course he doesn't care about reconquering the West.
Exactly.
So okay, we've made the parallel timeline now. But still, even if the East didn't invade, do you think? Because I see a lot going for the Franks. Anyways, they seem very strong and but Theodoric was a match. Let's say so. I don't. You see, I don't know if the power, because clearly Gaul and Italy were the main focus of the West, and then Italy is destroyed, and then so there's only Gaul left. I wonder what would have happened, if Italy wasn't destroyed. Is it a war between Italy and Gaul at a certain point?
I think I don't know. Certainly you know this, but I think was it in 511 until 520 or something, that Theodoric actually had even the hegemony over the Visigothic kingdom.
Yeah,
because I think, right. So I think it was in that time when he was actually also the ruler, the king of the Visigothic kingdom, because they had some sort of crisis. They didn't have like a successor. And then he was actually the ruler of both Gothic kingdoms. And now imagine, I'm imagining this timeline where, the Visigothic kingdom and the Ostrogothic kingdom, they unite. They are kinsmen. They are kinsmen of old. They speak probably a very almost the same language, with very minor differences. So they see each other as kinsmen. And I was thinking about how fascinating would a timeline be where actually this would have happened. And then if this would have happened, this would have been an extreme counterweight to the Franks. I think then the Franks would have had very big difficulties to become as powerful as they have become in our timeline.
I think I agree. It's probably difficult to maintain a kingdom so spread, but then again, that's the Roman Empire, right? So it's it was possible before; it can be possible again. I agree. That would have been a big counterbalance, as it was under Theodoric, because Theodoric reconquered basically southern Gaul. He annexed it directly to the Italian kingdom, and then he became king of the Visigoths. So he had that hegemony going for him. Well, so it's an extremely fascinating time. So if I have to ask you then, which one is your favorite Eastern Roman emperor before we go?
I think it's Leo the First.
Cape Bon fame.
Yes, of Cape Bon fame. I think, why he's my favorite emperor, because I think there's no other Eastern Roman emperor who tried to do as much to save the Western Roman Empire as he did. I mean, he went all out and tried to help the Western Roman Empire wherever he could. And, I think he understood that how important it would be to keep the West alive, because maybe he foresaw that if the West would fall long term, it wouldn't be good for the East as well. Because the Roman Empire was never designed to be split in two parts. It was like designed, it grew from one natural, point. And so it was probably he understood that it's not pretty good to have these two empires. And if one falls, he understood it's not good for the other. And so, he tried everything in his power. He intervened as often as he could and sent the huge fleet to help at Cape Bon. And, he wanted to help Antiquity to destroy Ricimer, to destroy this barbarian-like infiltration, if you will. And even later he sent Julius Nepos, So
the pre-last emperor was sent by him. It's true. Actually, somebody will say the last emperor, because he survived until 480. So I know there is a few Julius Nepos fan out there. But and he also had that role, Leo, in basically eliminating the dominance of the Magister Militum in the East. Again, re-establishing the authority of the emperor in the East. So, I indeed, once you put everything in place, it's surprising because, again, he's one of those emperors that no one has heard of, right? Leo the First. Because we only deal with those, right? but it's he's unfortunately he wasn't lucky in the sense that the big mission in the West failed. And that was probably due to the adversary being so intelligent. We were saying it before when we were off, the live. We were talking about who's the worst enemy the Rome ever had. And we said that Gaiseric probably has a good claim, right? Do you want to tell the audience, what you told me?
Gaiseric was just like an evil super genius, from a Roman perspective. If you if you're a Germanic, if you're a Vandal, you think he's great. But if you were a Western Roman, he was like an evil super genius. He was very intelligent and very ruthless and brutal at the same time. And, this combination. And then he lived so long as well. He was over 80 years old when he died, and he was king for over 40 years, 50 years or something.
Forever. It's forever.
It's crazy. And it's just brutal. And the bane, I like to call him the bane of the Romans, the Gaiseric, the bane of the Romans.
Was a bane for both Maiorian, eponymous, and for Leo, so your favorite Eastern Roman emperor. So he got both of them.
He destroyed all the plans to reconquer the Vandal kingdom. I don't know how many, because many forget actually there were even a few tries before Maiorian. I think
you're right.
Yes, I think one in 439, Aspar. I think even Aspar, who Leo, as you said before, killed later. But Aspar, I think in an attempt in 439, Aspar failed, and then was another try in 442. With the help of the Eastern fleet. And then what did Gaiseric do in 442? He sent envoys to Attila. He sent envoys to Attila the Hun and said, the Eastern Romans are now, withdrawing a lot of troops from the East. Now you can attack. You will not have problems anymore now because they will be very weak. And that is what he did. And then they had to withdraw their fleet again back. And that's how this try failed. So 1, 2, 3, 4 tries. 4 tries. He always four times the Romans. It's crazy.
it's crazy. And as you are saying, it's also always maneuvering things, because it's Attila, and then he's using his own puppets, Roman puppets, in order to put them on the throne, and he goes probably to sack Rome also to get the princesses, which then then uses as a bargaining tool. He marries one of his sons to one of them, just to say, okay, you see. He moves everything. And I find it supremely ironic. I was telling you before that he dies the year after the official death of the Western Roman Empire, saying like, I'm not gonna die before you do. So it's incredible. It's an incredible story indeed. So between Gaiseric, Attila, who else, and Alaric, that's usually the trio of the great enemy. You vote for Gaiseric, if I understood correctly.
I would vote for Gaiseric 100%.
Because I agree.
Africa was just so important for the Western Roman Empire, as you know, it was the richest province and it had the highest tax revenue for the Western Roman Empire. So the problem was, when Africa was lost, so much of the tax revenue for the Western Roman Empire suddenly fell away, And the East was luckier, because the East had the Levant, had Egypt, and it was very difficult to get there for the barbarians, because there was the Caucasus Mountains. You cannot go easily through the Caucasus. You cannot go from the north, because then you have Constantinople. How do you get over it? They weren't good at building ships. So, the East was more secure. They had the secure provinces and the richer provinces. And the West, they had Africa. And when Africa fell, it was like, I think, almost half the tax revenue of the Western Roman Empire, bam, gone. And that was brutal. And they would have needed to reconquer Africa. Without Africa, it looked not good. Good.
Before we go, I completely agree. Before we go, I have a couple of questions from Instagram. I don't want to leave it, because we are live also on Instagram. I'm doing trifecta. I don't want to leave them. So one is, I find it interesting that France and Germany are so different from many points of view, considering that actually they have common roots. Can you explain why? Oh, that's a broad question. Seb, do you want to give it a try?
I have to say I'm not an expert on later medieval history, but from what I can say is that probably this big shift happened later in the Middle Ages. So, I think the geography also played a role. There was the Rhine barrier, first of all, there was some sort of barrier, as you might have said. And also, I think, in the West, sure, there were the Franks, but in the East, I think these territories were more occupied, if I'm not mistaken, by the Alemanni, and the Saxons. And so, they were, in theory, not the same tribes. And, maybe they had a bit of a different, cultural heritage. And so even though they were for a while part, of course, of the Frankish kingdom, that's true, when the Frankish kingdom then, fell into an eastern and the western part. But I think the problem was that it wasn't the same tribe. And then you had also this geographic divide. So I think
the Rhine is a natural border between these two worlds, and this has always been, right? And one thing that I can add to that is that even very early, we know that the Frankish kingdom was divided into two main parts, Austrasia and Neustria. And Austrasia is mostly like the Rhine Valley and a bit in the east of the Rhine, a bit in the west of the Rhine. And Neustria is basically the region of Paris. And apparently the Neustrians spoke much more Latin than the Austrasians did. So there you have, even at the Merovingian time, you have the root of the differentiation. Yes, they were the same kingdom, but there were differences. And I think the reason is that there was so much more, like you said, so much more infrastructure, Roman infrastructure in Gaul than in Germany. It's true though that Köln and all these cities on the Rhine became Germany and not France, so it's not perfect, right? Let's put it this way. But yeah, I agree. And they were different. The Saxons, definitely. The Saxons remained pagan until Charlemagne. So there you already have a very big difference. And then Piace C. Ramos says, in my imagining world, Justinian had not invaded Italy and Latinity had never ended, and the Goths and Romans developed in one single people, which is basically what we were also imagining. So we are aligned. Who knows what would have maybe it would be worse, but we don't know. But it's fascinating to think about it.
Absolutely.
Well, Seb, I don't want to keep you for forever. I don't like lives that last forever. We are at around an hour and a half. I think we have covered this topic, several topics, quite in detail. I leave you with the last thing and I've been saying last thing too many times, but last thing is Gladiator 2. So I saw you made a video of reaction to the trailer. You said that Gladiator was a very important movie for you, also for me. What did you think about it? What are your expectations?
I thought it was an entertaining Hollywood trailer. Let's put it like this. And of course, I don't expect a historically accurate movie, right? I think we cannot go into that movie and think like, oh, this will be a nice historically correct or historically accurate movie. It is clear that it will be historically...
It won't be. And neither was Gladiator, to be completely fair.
Yes, exactly.
Although it captured the imagination and some essence of things in a way that even if in being incorrect could evoke love for that time, like it did for you and did also for me and so many other people.
I really hope that Gladiator 2 will inspire a new generation of movie watchers or young people, who previously had no interest for Roman history and weren't interested in the Roman Empire. Hopefully, a few % of those people who will watch this movie will start reading books about Roman history, will start reading, want to learn more about Roman history and the Roman Empire, and maybe some of them will be fascinated by late Roman history, and then they will start like, wow, what happened in the 3rd and 4th and 5th century, and then
and then they can go to Maiorianus to watch the videos,
or because come to your podcast one day,
or to my podcast. But it's the only channel still today on YouTube dedicated to late antiquity, as far as you know, fully dedicated to late antiquity.
I'm not sure if I'm not.
I don't know any
investigating other channels, but I think I'm not aware of others that only cover the late Roman Empire. Let's put it like this.
I think
let's say mostly 90% of the videos, because of course from time to time I will make
you will have one
videos.
Right. Oh, Seb, such a pleasure. Sebastian, such a pleasure. It's fantastic. Well, you can see, I think, how much we like this time period. We can stay here forever. By the way, I want to thank 1984, The Wall. Sorry, and that took the comic book. Thank you, and thank you, Sebastian, for your time. And let's do this again whenever we have a good topic. Thank you, but
Absolutely. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you for coming over.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun for me. I had a lot of fun talking to you, and I could talk to you for like probably 10 hours straight about this fascinating time period. So, I would be happy to repeat this again. And thank you also for the comic book. I cannot wait to read your comic book as well. So thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone that has been watching on Facebook, YouTube and Instagram. Bye. Good night.
E questo è tutto. Spero che la diretta vi sia piaciuta, spero in generale che Storia d'Italia Extra vi piaccia. Conto di portarvi altri contenuti nei prossimi mesi che magari non avete mai ascoltato da nessun'altra parte, ma ovviamente continueremo ad avere anche tutte le dirette, tutte le puntate speciali realizzate dal podcast. Per ora vi ringrazio per l'ascolto e vi auguro una magnifica giornata e appuntamento il prossimo mese per una nuova puntata di Storia d'Italia Extra.